The thing I found in the ground changed everything. But I need to tell you about the ground first. Specifically, I need to tell you about a quarter-acre lot in North Minneapolis on the eastern bank of Bassett Creek, where the soil had been sitting undisturbed beneath an abandoned light industrial building since 1987. The building had housed a dry cleaning operation that had, over the course of 22 years, disposed of its perchloroethylene, PCE, the primary solvent in commercial dry cleaning, by the method that cost-conscious small industrial operators commonly used before the EPA made this practice illegal, directly into the drainage system, which fed the creek, which fed the Mississippi. The building had been abandoned for 31 years when I first walked the site in September. The neighborhood around it, a stretch of North Minneapolis that had been economically neglected for decades while other parts of the city got glossy infrastructure investment, had been trying to reclaim that lot for a community garden for 3 years. The neighborhood association had the commitment, the volunteer labor, the donated equipment. What they needed was someone to tell them whether the soil was safe. That is what I do. My name is Sable Adeyemi. I am 32 years old. I am the executive director of Clear Basin Initiative, a Minneapolis-based environmental science nonprofit that I co-founded 4 years ago with a hydrogeologist named Dr. Petra Lindqvist. We do soil and water quality assessment for underserved communities, communities that cannot afford the private environmental consulting rates that would ordinarily be required to answer the question, is this ground safe? We have completed assessments for 47 sites across the Twin Cities metro area. We have secured remediation funding for 19 of them. We have published peer-reviewed research on legacy contamination patterns in post-industrial urban neighborhoods that has been cited in federal EPA policy discussions 3 times. My brother Timothy is a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical distributor. He was recently promoted to National Accounts Director, which is a significant step and which he worked hard for and which he deserves to celebrate. I was not invited to his party. The scene that contains the beginning of this story happened not at the party and not on the day of my mother's call, but 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in September, in the basement of a building that should have been condemned 6 years ago, with a soil auger and a headlamp and the particular focused attention of a scientist who has been doing this long enough to trust what the data will say before the data confirms it. I am telling the story this way, from the ground up, from the basement first, because engine_12 stories begin with the person who is physically removed, who built a life in a new place, who found the reversal not in a conference room or a news announcement, but in the specific geography of the work. My reversal lives in the soil. It has lived there since September. The Forbes call is just the moment the world caught up to what the ground already knew. I came to Minneapolis from Lagos, by way of Nairobi, by way of London, by way of Ann Arbor. My parents immigrated from Nigeria to Michigan when I was 3. My father became an accountant. My mother became a high school chemistry teacher. They built a careful, considered, thoroughly American professional life in Dearborn, Michigan, and they raised 2 children inside the specific value system of first-generation immigrant parents who have bet everything on a particular definition of success: stable, credentialed, legible, defensible to the community. Timothy is 4 years older. He took the stable, credentialed, legible path with the ease of a person for whom that path is genuinely the right fit. He is good at sales. He is good at relationships. He calls our parents every Sunday and has done so since he left for Michigan State at 18. I took the other path. Not because I was rebellious. I was not rebellious. Because at 19, in my second year at University of Michigan studying environmental science, I spent a semester in Lagos visiting extended family, and I came back with a specific understanding of what contaminated water does to communities over generations, and I understood that the understanding was the thing I had been given, and I could not in good conscience use it for anything other than the work it pointed toward. My parents supported this. Initially, they supported the University of Michigan degree. Good school, good credential, defensible to the community. They supported the master's at University of Minnesota, also good, also credentialed. They began to have concerns during the 3 years I spent doing field work for a federal environmental contractor, living on contract salaries that were real but not impressive by their metrics. The concerns became consistent when I told them I was leaving the federal contractor to start a nonprofit. A nonprofit, my mother said. An environmental science nonprofit, I said. Who pays you? We'll have grant funding. The silence that followed that sentence was of a specific quality that I had learned to read accurately. The silence of a woman who loves her daughter and is frightened that the daughter has made a mistake that cannot be undone. She was not wrong to be frightened. Year 1 of Clear Basin was frightening. I was not wrong to do it anyway. The Bassett Creek site had been in my assessment queue since June. The neighborhood association contact was a woman named Cynthia Moorhead, who had lived on the block adjacent to the abandoned building for 22 years and who had been trying, with the particular patient determination of someone who has been told no by bureaucracies long enough to develop strategies for going around them, to get someone to look at the soil since 2019. She had contacted the city. She had contacted the county. She had contacted 3 private environmental firms whose quotes had been, respectively, $18,000, $22,000, and $31,000, numbers that were not possible for a community organization running on bake sales and small foundation grants. She found Clear Basin through a referral from another community organization in South Minneapolis whose contamination assessment we had completed the previous year. She called me on a Tuesday in June. We talked for 90 minutes. I told her we could take the site. Petra and I completed the preliminary desktop review over the summer. Historical records permit documentation, aerial photography going back to 1970, the specific archaeology of a small industrial operation that had done what small industrial operations commonly did before environmental regulation had teeth. The dry cleaning solvent signature was consistent with the site history. We started the soil sampling in September. The basement assessment on the Tuesday I am thinking about, the day that functions in this story as the scene that reveals everything before anything is revealed. That was the 4th site visit. Petra was at a conference in Chicago. My field assistant Marcus, a 24-year-old environmental science graduate student from the University of Minnesota who had been working with us for 2 years and who had the particular combination of physical endurance and scientific precision that field work requires, was with me. We had drilled 11 borings across the site. The data was consistent and damning and not surprising. But the basement had one more section we had not accessed, a back room that had been sealed, we discovered, not by neglect but by someone who had placed a false wall of drywall across a doorway at some point in the building's history. Marcus found the seam in the drywall at approximately 3 in the afternoon. He looked at me. I looked at it. We pulled it open. Behind it, shelving. Metal industrial shelving, the kind that was standard in light industrial spaces in the 1980s, rusted now but structurally intact. And on the shelving, 11 5-gallon drums, sealed, labeled in the faded print of a chemical supply company that had ceased operations in 1993. Perchloroethylene. Undisposed. Sealed. Sitting in a basement in North Minneapolis for 31 years. I stood in that room for a moment. Marcus was behind me, headlamp illuminating the drums, and I could hear him doing the math, the quantity, the potential leach rate if any of the drums had microfractures, the relationship between these drums, and the contamination patterns we had already mapped.
Sable, he said.
I know, I said. This was, in the specific language of environmental remediation, a significant find. Not good news. The drums complicated the remediation pathway and the cost significantly. But the kind of find that makes the story of what happened to this ground complete, and therefore actionable in a way that the story, without the drums, was not. I photographed everything. I took samples. I secured the room. We drove back to the Clear Basin office in silence because Marcus has worked with me long enough to understand when I need to process without talking. In the office, I called Petra in Chicago. She listened to the drum's description and said, "That changes the remediation classification." I know. And the funding tier. I know. EPA Brownfields Enhancement. That's what I'm thinking. That's a $500,000 grant floor, she said. I know, I said. Call me tonight. I hung up. I sat at my desk. Outside the Clear Basin office window. We are on the 2nd floor of a building in the Jordan neighborhood. A deliberate choice about where the organization should be physically located. North Minneapolis was doing its September thing. The particular quality of late afternoon light on that side of the city. Honest and unadorned. I had been awake since 5. I had driven to the site at 7. I had been in that basement for 3 hours. I was, in the physical definition, exhausted, the specific collapse of a body that has been running on focus for 10 hours and has reached the end of its fuel. I put my head down on my desk. Not dramatically. Just, the desk was there and my head needed somewhere to go, and I stayed like that for 11 minutes before the phone rang and pulled me back up. 11 minutes of not being the director. Just a person who was tired. The Forbes call came 6 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in October, in the middle of my brother's promotion party. But first, my mother's call, which came 3 weeks before the party. She called on a Wednesday evening while I was writing the Bassett Creek Site Assessment Report, the full technical document that would accompany the EPA Brownfields grant application. The report was 47 pages, including appendices. I was on page 31. Timothy's promotion party is the 15th, she said. She had led with this no greeting, which told me the call had a specific destination. I know. I have it on my calendar. A pause with preparation in it. I've been thinking about the guest list. I kept typing for a second, then stopped. Timothy has worked so hard for this, she said. This is a real moment for him. His colleagues will be there, his regional VP, his clients. A pause. I just think, and your father agrees, that having you there creates a certain energy.
People know your situation.
They know things haven't quite, she stopped. Started differently. It's not mean, Sable. It's practical. You being there just reminds people of what didn't work out. It puts a shadow on the celebration. My situation. What didn't work out? The EPA Brownfields application was sitting in a folder on my desktop. The preliminary estimate for the Bassett Creek remediation was $1.2 million. The find of the drums in the sealed basement had qualified the site for federal Superfund preliminary assessment consideration. The peer-reviewed paper Petra and I had published in June in Environmental Science and Technology had been cited 4 times in the past 3 months. I said nothing about any of this. Okay, I said. You understand. I understand. My father's voice in the background. Let him have this, Sable. Tell Timothy, I said. Congratulations, I said. I hung up. I stared at page 30, one of the Bassett Creek report. I stared at it for a long time without seeing it. Then I picked up the phone and called Petra. My mother just told me not to come to my brother's party, I said, because my situation reminds people of failure. Petra Lindqvist is Swedish-born and 53 and has the particular quality of directness that I have come to associate with Scandinavian scientists of a certain generation, the willingness to say the true thing without softening it into uselessness. She said, your situation. As in the woman who found 11 drums of undisposed PCE in a sealed basement and is about to file a $500,000 federal grant application. That situation, I said. Your mother doesn't know about the drums. My mother doesn't know about the drums, I confirmed. A pause. Have you told her about the Forbes inquiry? The Forbes inquiry had arrived 2 weeks earlier. A journalist named Michael Adebayo, I had noted the Yoruba surname with a specific warmth, was working on a piece about innovative environmental justice organizations for the magazine's Impact 50 list. He had found Clear Basin through our environmental science and technology paper and had sent a detailed inquiry about our model, our funding, our community impact metrics. I had not told my family about the Forbes inquiry. I had not decided yet whether to participate. It was, at that point, still a possibility rather than a certainty. No, I said. Are you going to? I looked at page 30, one of the Bassett Creek report. When the work is ready to be seen, I said. Not before. Petra was quiet for a moment. The drums are the work being ready, she said. She was right. I knew she was right. I emailed Michael Adebayo that night. The party was on a Saturday at a restaurant in Bloomington, the kind of suburban restaurant chosen for this kind of occasion. Good enough to feel celebratory, familiar enough to feel comfortable, large private room available for a group of 30. My parents drove down from Dearborn. Timothy's colleagues came from regional offices in Chicago, Kansas City, Denver. I was not there. I was at my apartment in the Jordan neighborhood, the apartment I had been in for 3 years, small and specific and entirely mine, with a drafting table I used for site mapping and a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way I had never stopped being grateful for. I was finishing the Bassett Creek report. Page 43. At 7:48 p.m. my phone rang. Not my mother. My brother. I looked at the name.
Timothy. Calling from the party.
I answered. Sable. His voice was strange. Not upset, strange. The specific strangeness of someone who has just received information that has reorganized something.
Timothy.
How's the party? He stopped. Mom just got a call. From a journalist. Forbes. I kept my pen on the page. He asked if she was your mother. He said he was fact-checking a piece. He said he told her what the piece was about. A pause. Sable. He said you were on the Impact 50 list. The selection isn't final yet, I said. He's fact-checking. He said the community impact metrics for your nonprofit were among the highest in the environmental justice category in the country. That's accurate, I said. Silence. Mom he stopped. She stepped outside. She's been outside for 10 minutes. I looked at the Bassett Creek report. Page 43. The drums section. The 11 drums in the sealed room, the 31 years, the contamination pathway, the children who had been playing in a community garden space that was built on ground that was trying to tell the truth about what had been done to it. How are you? I said. Not deflecting, genuinely asking. This was Timothy's night, and Timothy had called me, which was its own kind of information. He stopped again. I didn't know. About the nonprofit. About the work. Mom talks about your situation like he stopped a third time. I should have asked more questions. Yes, I said. You should have. I'm sorry you're not here. I know you are. I'm actually sorry.
Not, he paused.
I knew about the party logistics. I didn't push back. I should have. This was the truest thing my brother had said to me in a long time. Not the elaborate version, not the full accounting, just the essential sentence, delivered without defense. I recognized the cost of it and received it accordingly. Thank you, I said. Can I come see the work? He said. The nonprofit. The sites. I want to understand what you actually do. Yes, I said. Come in the spring. I'll take you to Bassett Creek. What's at Bassett Creek? Something I found in the ground, I said. I'll show you. My mother called at 9:17. I was still at the drafting table. The report was on page 46, nearly done. Outside the east-facing window, Minneapolis in October had gone dark, the city lights coming up in the particular way they do across a flat Midwestern skyline, even and honest and unspectacular, and entirely itself.
Sable, she said.
Hi, Mom. Her voice had the quality I had heard in it only a handful of times. Unmanaged, the architecture set aside, just her actual voice in the room with mine. The journalist told me things, she said. About the work. I know. 47 sites. Yes. 19 remediations. Yes. He said children in North Minneapolis were drinking water contaminated by a site you found, and that your organization secured the funding to fix it. A pause. Is that true? That's the Fremont Avenue site, I said. 2 years ago. Yes. She was quiet. The drums, I said. At the new site I'm finishing now. I found 11 drums of dry cleaning solvent in a sealed basement. Undisposed since 1987. In a neighborhood where people were planning to build a community garden. I paused. That's what I've been working on. Silence. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't. I said your situation, she stopped. I called your work a situation. You did. Because I was frightened, she said. And this particular sentence was the one I had not expected. Not the apology, not the revision, not the pride that would eventually come.
The fear first. Honest.
Undefended. I have been frightened since you left the federal contractor. I kept waiting for you to call and say it wasn't working. The way I called my own mother when things weren't working and she said she stopped. What did Grandma say? I asked. A long pause. She said I should have stayed in Lagos. That all of this, the immigration, the Michigan life, the American career, was too uncertain. That I had made it too hard for myself. Another pause. She said it when I was 29 and I had just passed my teaching certification and your father and we were fine, we were building something real. And she told me I had made it too hard. I had never heard this story. My mother had never told this story. And you believed her? I said. For about 6 months, she said. And then I stopped believing her. But I never forgot the feeling of being told the thing you'd built wasn't enough. And I think, her voice was careful now, moving through something delicate. I think I was so afraid of you feeling that I created it. By calling your work uncertain. By not asking questions. By treating your situation as the problem instead of the proof. This was, I thought, the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. I held the phone. Outside, Minneapolis. The flat Midwestern dark. The lights. Mom, I said. I'm going to send you the Bassett Creek report when it's done. It'll be done tonight. I want you to read it. I won't understand all the science. You taught high school chemistry for 22 years, I said. You'll understand more than you think. A sound that was close to a laugh. Small and surprised. Okay, she said. Send it. And the Forbes piece, when it runs. Yes, she said. I want to read it. It's about the work, I said. Not the family. I know, she said. It should be about the work. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. She told me about the party, the food, Timothy's speech, the VP from the national office who had flown in. She said Timothy had cried a little during his speech, which was characteristic and which I found, hearing it secondhand, genuinely moving. I told her about the drums, the sealed room, the 31 years. She was quiet for a long time after the drums. Those children, she said. Were safe, I said. The community garden hadn't broken ground yet. That's why the assessment mattered. But they wouldn't have known. No, I said. They wouldn't have known. That's the work, she said. It was not a question. It was a woman arriving at an understanding she had been circling for 4 years. That's the work, I said. I finished the Bassett Creek report at 11:40 p.m. and sent it to my mother at 11:42 with a note that said, Page 34 is the drums. Start there if you want to understand what I found. She replied at 7:19 the next morning. I started at page 1. I'm on page 28. I have questions. I called her at 8. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. She asked 14 questions, 11 of which were scientifically specific and 3 of which were about the community, about Cynthia Moorhead, about the neighborhood association, about what the people who had been living near the creek for 20 years felt when they found out what was underneath the abandoned building. I answered all 14. At the end of the call, she said, I owe you an apology.
For the party.
For the word practical. For not asking questions for 4 years. I know, I said. That's not enough, is it? It's the beginning of enough, I said. The rest of it is the questions. Keep asking the questions. She said she would. I believe she meant it. The Forbes Impact 50 piece ran in November. Michael Adebayo wrote it with the care of someone who understood the subject and respected its weight. Clear Basin Initiative was listed at number 12. The piece described the Fremont Avenue remediation, the peer-reviewed publication record, the community partnership model. It described the Bassett Creek drums as an example of what the organization's field work makes possible. The difference between a community garden built on contaminated ground and a community garden built on ground that has been made safe. The piece did not mention my family. Michael had asked in the interview whether there were people in my personal life who had supported the work from the beginning. I said yes. Petra, Marcus, the board, the community partners. He did not push further. My mother shared the Forbes piece on her Facebook page. She wrote, My daughter, Sable Adeyemi, has been doing this work for years. I didn't know enough about it. I'm learning. Please read this. 12 of her friends commented. 3 of them tagged their own children. One woman wrote, Gloria, this made me cry. You must be so proud. My mother replied, I am. I should have said so sooner. I read that exchange on my phone at my drafting table on a Tuesday morning in November while reviewing the final remediation cost estimate for Bassett Creek. The EPA Brownfields application had been submitted the previous week. The preliminary estimate was $1.4 million, higher than the initial figure, adjusted for the drums removal. I read my mother's words, I should have said so sooner, and I sat with them. They were true. She should have said so sooner. The years that preceded the saying, the situations, the practicals, the party I did not attend, those years have a cost that the November Facebook comment does not erase. This is what a Pyrrhic victory is, in its actual form. Not a defeat disguised as a win, but a real win with a real cost, both things fully present, neither canceling the other. I am winning something real. The work is real. The drums are real. The children who will plant their community garden in safe soil next spring are real. The years are also real. I hold both. Timothy came to Minneapolis in April. He drove up on a Friday afternoon, stayed at a hotel in the North Loop, and met me at the Clear Basin office on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, which told me he had set an alarm, which told me he was taking this seriously. I took him to 5 sites. We started at Fremont Avenue, the first major remediation, the one my mother had read about in the Bassett Creek report, the ground that was now clean and built into a small park with a community garden and a water feature that Cynthia Moorhead had helped design. We stood at the edge of it in the April light, and I told him the full story, the contamination, the assessment, the funding fight, the 3 years from first sample to final certification. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely revising their understanding. Not performing attention, actually paying it. At the 4th site, a former auto body shop in the Willard Hay neighborhood where we were mid-remediation, he said, "Mom told me about the drums." She did. "She calls me on Sundays," he said. "The last 3 months, she's been telling me about your work. Things she'd read, things she'd asked you about." He looked at the site, the remediation equipment, the soil boring locations marked with orange flags. "She's trying. I know she is."
Dad, too, he said.
He told his accounting firm's partners about the Impact 50 piece. He printed it out. I stopped walking for a second. My father, who expresses pride through logistics rather than words, who had never, in my memory, talked about my work to his professional colleagues the way he talked about Timothy's promotions, had printed out the Forbes piece and shown it to his partners. "He printed it," I said. "He printed it," Timothy confirmed. I kept walking. At Bassett Creek, we stood on the bank above the remediation zone. The creek was running clear in the April light, the way it runs in spring before the summer algae establish. The abandoned building was gone. Demolition had happened in February, the first step in a remediation process that would take 18 months and would, at its end, return this ground to the community that had been asking for it since 2019. Timothy looked at the creek for a long time. "I'm sorry I didn't push back," he said.
About the party.
"When Mom called me and said you weren't coming, I said okay. I should have asked why." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I was so focused on my thing. The promotion, the VP, the party. I didn't have room to, he stopped. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said, "but it's honest." We stood at the creek for a while. April in Minneapolis is tentative and specific, the cold still present in the air but the light changed, angled differently, carrying the first suggestion of what is coming. The reeds along the bank were beginning to show new growth, the pale green of things that have been underground all winter and are now deciding whether to trust the warmth. "What happens to this?" he said, gesturing at the creek, the bank, the remediation zone. "When it's done," I said, "the neighborhood association builds the garden. Cynthia Moorhead's been waiting 6 years. She's already drawn the layout." He nodded. He looked at the pale green reeds. "It matters," he said. "Simply." "It does," I said. We drove back to the office in the late afternoon, and I showed him the assessment database, 47 sites, each with its full documentation, the contamination history, and the remediation status, and the community impact notes. He asked questions for 90 minutes. He asked about funding, about the scientific methodology, about what Marcus did in the field. He asked about Petra. He asked about Cynthia Moorhead. He asked, at one point, whether we had any corporate partners. "We're careful about corporate partnerships," I said, "because of conflicts of interest with the contamination histories. But some pharmaceutical companies, actually, they have environmental compliance mandates and community relations needs that align with our work without creating conflicts." He was quiet for a moment. "I could make an introduction," he said. "At my company, if you want. The national accounts level has a community investment budget." I looked at him. "I'm not doing it to," he stopped. "I'm not doing it to fix what happened. I know that's not how that works. He looked at me directly. I'm doing it because it's the right introduction and I should have thought of it 2 years ago.
I know, I said.
Is that okay? Yes, I said. Make the introduction. There is something I have been thinking about since Bassett Creek. The drums sat in that sealed room for 31 years. They did not announce themselves. They did not leak visibly. There was no surface contamination that would have been caught by a standard visual assessment. They were simply there, in the dark, behind a false wall, doing their slow, patient chemistry in a building that everyone had written off as empty. The community above the basement had been planning a garden. They had been planning it for 3 years. They had been told by the city, by private consultants, by the general inertia of bureaucratic neglect, that the building was probably fine, that the soil was probably safe, that the cost of knowing for certain was not worth paying. Clear Basin paid the cost of knowing. I think about this when I think about my family, about the years of being the uncertain one, the one whose situation was a shadow on other people's celebrations. There was something in the basement of those years, something real, building quietly behind a wall that nobody had thought to open. Not a problem. A fact. The work, accumulating in the dark, waiting for someone to pull the drywall back. My mother pulled it back eventually. Not voluntarily. A Forbes journalist called her phone during her son's party and made it impossible not to know. But she opened the door when she could have defended the wall, and that choice is hers, and I am choosing to receive it as hers. The rest of it we are building together. Slowly. Imperfectly. The way things get built when the foundation is honest instead of convenient. The EPA Brownfields application is under review. Cynthia Moorhead's garden layout is on the wall of the Clear Basin office, next to the drafting table, in the space where the morning light hits first. She drew it in pencil on grid paper. 47 raised beds, a water access station, 3 benches, facing the creek. She showed it to me in February and said, 6 years. But it's going to be right. I think about that sentence sometimes when the work is slow, or the funding is uncertain, or the bureaucracy requires one more revision of one more application. 6 years. But it's going to be right. Some things take as long as they take. The building is the thing. The building is always the thing. Forgiveness. Is it something you find for them, or something you build for yourself? Tell me in the comments.